The Galactic Empire fleet drifted into the outskirts of a star system that was not marked on any of their ancient maps. The vast armada of ships, silent against the backdrop of a cold and empty void, the massive vessels seemed to stretch endlessly as they moved forward, their sleek surfaces gleaming under the light of distant suns. These ships were the pride of the Empire, each designed to strike fear into the hearts of all who dared to stand before them. At the head of the fleet was the Dreadnought, the flagship of the Emperor, a vessel of immense power and unrivaled capability. Its weapon systems could reduce entire worlds to ashes with a single command. The crew aboard the Dreadnought had never known defeat, their enemies crushed with overwhelming force. Yet as the fleet reached the edge of this unknown system, there was something strange on the sensors, a faint signal, a rhythmic pulse coming from a single source that did not fit any known patterns of communication. The admiral in command of the fleet stood before the command console, studying the signal, his eyes narrowed with curiosity. The fleet was not supposed to encounter anything of interest here. This region was forgotten by all but the most distant explorers, yet here it was a signal echoing across the vastness of space, a lone beacon in the emptiness. Admiral Terran turned to his communications officer, who was already analyzing the transmission. He asked for a translation, but the response was garbled. The message seemed foreign, but there was a structure to it that suggested intelligence behind it. The officer's hands flew across the controls, adjusting frequencies, trying to clear the signal, but it only grew louder, more insistent. A series of crackling sounds filtered through the speakers, and then a voice. It was not like any voice the Empire had ever heard. It was human, raw, and filled with an energy that sent a chill through the command deck. The voice spoke in short bursts, no formalities, no titles, just words that echoed with defiance and strength. "We are coming, and we will not kneel. We fight for our home. We will never stop." The words hit the officers with a strange weight, their minds racing with confusion and disbelief. The admiral stood frozen before the speaker as the voice echoed in the vast chamber. They had received countless transmissions before, but this one was different. This one had a presence. This one was a challenge. A slight shift in the background of the message made it clear the transmission was coming from a single vessel, not a fleet, not a gathering of ships, but one solitary ship moving through the void. The question immediately arose, how could such a small ship be sending such a message? The admiral's mind whirled with possibilities, but none of them made sense. No species the Empire had ever encountered would send a lone ship to face them. The fleet was not meant to stop here. No resources had been designated for an unknown species, and no scouts had been sent ahead to gather intelligence. This system had been forgotten. And yet here it was, an uninvited presence in the Empire's path. And more troubling still was the unwavering tone of the message. The Empire had never known a species bold enough to speak so openly to its power without fear of annihilation. Admiral Terran had a decision to make. The fleet could continue its journey, or it could investigate this signal and discover what it meant. The curiosity gnawed at him, but the looming presence of the fleet's firepower told him they could handle whatever challenge lay ahead. The question, however, remained in his mind: what kind of species would dare defy the might of the Galactic Empire with nothing more than a single ship? The Dreadnought moved slowly toward the source of the signal, its engines hum barely perceptible as it cut through the dark space. The admiral stared out of the observation window, his mind wrestling with the implications of what he had just heard. A single human ship had dared challenge the Empire's might, with a message that held no fear, no hesitation, just a raw declaration of will. Yet even as the fleet moved closer, there was still no sign of any other ships, not a fleet to back the claim, not even a second vessel, just one small ship with a voice that seemed to carry the weight of an entire civilization. The communications officer turned to the admiral, his face pale. The signal had become more intense now, as if it were calling out to them with increasing urgency. The pulse was steady, growing clearer and more focused each passing moment, as if the message itself was coming closer to them, its echo reaching across the void. "Admiral," the officer began cautiously, "we tried all standard channels, but the signal's pattern is irregular. It's almost as if it's designed to be heard by a specific listener." The Admiral nodded thoughtfully, still staring out at the endless stars. He knew that any other civilization in the galaxy would have tried to hide from the Empire, but this human ship was different. It had made no attempt to mask its presence, no attempt to flee from the power of the fleet. Instead, it had announced itself, boldly challenging the very might of the Empire. "What do we know of this species?" the Admiral asked, turning toward the fleet's intelligence officer. The officer's console lit up with various displays as he began scrolling through data, but there was nothing substantial, not a single detailed report, no significant history, no known wars or battles, no record of human contact with any of the known galactic factions, just fragmented bits of information here and there scattered across the far reaches of space. "We've encountered scattered human colonies and trade outposts across the galaxy," the intelligence officer reported, "but nothing of this scale, no large fleets, no unified government. Their species seems primitive by our standards." Primitive? Admiral Terran murmured, his mind racing. Then why would they send such a message from a lone ship with no fleet to back them? His eyes drifted back to the viewport where the distant human vessel now loomed on the edge of the Empire's perception. The ship was small compared to the mighty warships of the Empire, its hull battered and worn like it had seen years of conflict, but it was still intact, still holding together in the face of overwhelming odds. "Perhaps it's not about what they have," the Admiral muttered to himself, "but about what they believe." The communications officer shifted nervously. "Shall we initiate contact with the ship, sir?" The Admiral considered the question carefully for a moment, his thoughts filled with an unease. He could not explain. Humans were not supposed to be a threat. They had not developed any meaningful technology capable of challenging the Empire's dominance. But there was something about the raw determination in their message, something that set them apart from every other species they had encountered. "Yes," the Admiral finally ordered, "open a channel to the human ship. Let them speak for themselves." The bridge fell into a tense silence as the command was relayed to the communications team. Within moments, the speaker came to life again. But this time it was not a voice alone that filled the room. Instead, the image of the human captain appeared on the main view screen. The man looked exhausted, but resolute, his eyes sharp and unwavering as he addressed the Empire. "This is Captain Jonas Riley of the human vessel Perseverance. We have one ship and one message," the captain said, his voice strong, but laced with the wariness of one who had been through too much. "We do not seek war, we seek survival, and we will do whatever it takes to protect our people." The Admiral's heart skipped a beat as he stared into the eyes of the human captain. Those eyes held no fear, no sign of submission, only an unbreakable will to endure. The captain paused for a moment, his gaze steady before adding the final words that would forever echo in the minds of the Empire's leaders. "You have been warned." The transmission ended abruptly, and the screen went black, leaving the fleet in an eerie silence. The Admiral felt a strange tension settle over him. This was not the reaction he had expected from a species so far removed from the Empire's power, but there was something unmistakable in the captain's words, something that hinted at far more than they could comprehend. Admiral Terran stared into the void as the fleet continued its approach, and one question lingered in his mind. Why had humanity sent just one ship to deliver such a dire warning? The bridge of the dreadnought remained unnervingly quiet as Admiral Terran stood still, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out into the abyss of space. The voice of Captain Jonas Riley echoed in his mind, those final words hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "You have been warned." The entire fleet had halted, every vessel suspended in the void as they waited for the Admiral's next command. It was not fear that gripped the crew. It was something far rarer, uncertainty. For the first time in decades, the Empire was not facing an inferior force cowering at their feet. Instead, they faced a species that seemed to be walking toward their doom, with eyes wide open, fully aware of their inevitable end, yet unwilling to yield. The silence stretched on until Admiral Terran snapped back to attention. "Have we located the human ship's position?" he asked, his voice breaking the stillness. The communications officer immediately turned to his console, fingers flying over the keys, eyes wide in disbelief. "Yes, Admiral. The human ship is maintaining position, further in system." It's holding its course. No signs of any additional ships, no changes in speed or trajectory. Any indication of reinforcements? Terran pressed. No, Admiral. There are no other signals in the system, just the single ship. The Admiral stared at the readout, his mind working quickly. Every instinct screamed that this was not right. No civilization would send a single, unarmed ship into the path of an empire as powerful as theirs. It didn't make sense. And yet, here it was. One ship, seemingly a relic, standing alone in the face of overwhelming force, and yet not retreating, not even attempting to hide. Turning sharply, Admiral Terran addressed his tactical officer. Are the weapons systems primed? The officer nodded, his voice taut. All weapons are at full readiness, sir. We can neutralize the target with a single volley. Terran gritted his teeth. There was no question in his mind that the Empire had the firepower to obliterate the human ship within moments. But the captain's words gnawed at him. Why had they sent just one ship? What was the human purpose here? Do we have any record of similar species with such behavior? The Admiral asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The intelligence officer's face remained grim as he scrolled through the archives. Nothing in our database, sir. There have been reports of human colonies scattered throughout the galaxy, but nothing that suggests any military power or capacity for such persistence. Terran clenched his jaw. I want to know everything about this human species, their history, their technology, their psychology. I want to understand how one ship can make a challenge like this. The officer nodded. Understood, sir. I'll start pulling all available data from the archives and external sources. The Admiral turned his gaze back to the view screen, where the lone human ship remained, still and silent. His thoughts churned with questions that had no immediate answers. What if this was a trap? What if they were being lured into something far worse? It was inconceivable that one ship, with no apparent support, would be a threat to the Empire's might. And yet, the audacity of their defiance gnawed at him, a seed of doubt growing in his mind. Continue monitoring the human ship's movements, the Admiral ordered. We need to know everything about this species. I want a full report by the time we reach their position. As the fleet moved steadily forward, the crew worked diligently, gathering data and scanning for anything unusual. But with each passing moment, Terran's unease deepened. The Empire had crushed countless civilizations in its rise to power, but this felt different. The humans had made a choice to face the Empire, to stand firm against the overwhelming odds. And that one ship was a statement, a challenge unlike any the Empire had seen before. Despite the cold, calculating logic that the Empire thrived on, Terran could not ignore the growing sense that the very nature of this encounter was about to change something fundamental within the Empire. What kind of species would stand alone against such a force? As the distance between the dreadnought and the human ship decreased, Admiral Terran found himself lost in thought, unable to shake the nagging suspicion that this encounter, this single ship, would set in motion a chain of events that could reshape the entire galaxy. The dreadnought slowly closed the distance between itself and the human ship, a process that felt almost surreal to Admiral Terran. It was as if the stars themselves held their breath, the emptiness of space surrounding them, amplifying the unnatural tension that filled the bridge. The cold hum of the ship's engines and the soft clatter of consoles being monitored were the only sounds that punctuated the stillness. Yet even as the massive flagship loomed ever closer, the human ship did not falter, did not attempt to change course. It was as if it were waiting, calmly resolute. Admiral Terran stood before the command center, his eyes fixed on the viewport, watching the lone vessel, the Perseverance, grow larger with each passing moment. The human ship, though battered and worn, seemed to carry with it an undeniable weight, an essence of defiance. The Admiral's thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. How had this ship survived for so long? What could possibly drive a species to risk everything for the sake of one vessel? No fleet, no reinforcements, Just this one ship, holding its position against the might of the Empire. "Sir," the communications officer spoke, breaking Terran's reverie. "We've established a direct communications link with the human ship. They're ready to speak." Terran nodded, his jaw set firmly. "Proceed. Let's hear what they have to say." The bridge fell silent once more as the holographic image of Captain Jonas Riley appeared on the main screen. He stood tall, despite the exhaustion written on his face. His eyes were piercing, filled with a quiet confidence that could not be faked. There was no fear in him, only resolve. The image flickered for a moment before the captain's voice echoed clearly through the room. "This is Captain Jonas Riley of the human ship Perseverance. I trust you've received our message." His tone was calm, even, but there was an unmistakable strength to it. "We are not looking for a fight, but we will not back down." Terran narrowed his eyes, studying the captain's every word. "You speak of survival, yet you come alone. You have no fleet to support you, no reinforcements. Why?" The admiral's voice was steady, but there was a hint of something beneath it. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. Captain Riley didn't flinch. "Humanity doesn't need to hide behind fleets. We stand alone when we must, and we fight when we must. This is our ship, and this is our stand. I know what your empire is capable of, but you don't know what we're capable of." He paused, his gaze unyielding. "You asked why we're alone. Because we've had no choice. We lost our fleets. We've seen what happens when a species loses hope, but we don't have that luxury. Not now." The silence in the room was thick. Admiral Terran's mind raced. Humanity had faced some sort of catastrophe, something that had torn their fleets apart, and yet here they were, still standing, still challenging the Empire. It was impossible to ignore the subtle weight behind the captain's words. This wasn't about technology or firepower. It was about something more elusive, something harder to quantify. Will, the human will to endure. "What do you want from us, Captain?" Terran asked after a long moment, his voice slightly softer now, almost begrudgingly respectful. "Why risk everything for a single ship?" "We want nothing from you, Admiral," Riley replied, his expression unwavering. "But if you insist on destroying us, then you'll learn why humanity is a species worth knowing. We've survived worse than what your empire can throw at us. I hope you never have to see it for yourselves." Terran swallowed, his mind grasping for something to counter the quiet power in Riley's words. But there was nothing. No empire, no force, no military strategy had ever been built on something as intangible as human resolve. The Empire understood technology, power, and subjugation, but resolve. That was a force they had never truly understood. "I see," the Admiral said slowly. "Then we will proceed with our investigation. Your message has been received, Captain. We will see if your species is as resilient as you claim." Captain Riley's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but his voice remained steady. "You'll find out soon enough, Admiral. But remember this isn't about victory or defeat. It's about survival, and we will survive." With that, the communication ended, leaving the bridge in an eerie silence. Terran stood frozen for a moment, staring at the blank screen where the human captain had been. His hands clenched at his sides as the weight of the conversation settled heavily on him. For the first time in his career, Admiral Terran was uncertain. He had never faced anything like this. The human captain's words echoed in his mind, each one an echo of something deeper, something far more dangerous than any weapon the Empire had at its disposal. "Ready the fleet," Terran finally said, his voice low. "We continue our approach, but stay alert. Something about this situation doesn't sit right." The crew acknowledged the command, and the fleet resumed its slow advance. But the tension on the bridge remained thick and unyielding. The human ship, still holding its ground, was not just a threat. It was a mystery, a puzzle that the Empire had yet to solve. And Admiral Terran knew one thing for sure. This was not going to be the easy conquest they had assumed it would be. As the dreadnought moved ever closer to the Perseverance, the weight of the situation pressed down on Admiral Terran like a thick fog. The words of Captain Jonas Riley echoed in his mind with increasing intensity. "We will survive." It wasn't just a promise. It was a declaration. A species that had faced annihilation and still stood resolute. The thought was unsettling. The Empire was not accustomed to such resistance, especially from a species as seemingly insignificant as humans. On the bridge, the crew worked in a quiet urgency, tracking the human ship's every movement. Yet, there was nothing to report. The Perseverance held its course, seemingly unaware, or uncaring, of the impending doom that was fast approaching. There was no attempt to flee, no attempt to hide behind asteroid fields or planetary shields. It was as if they had already accepted their fate, and yet they still refused to bend. "Admiral," the intelligence officer said, breaking the silence, "we've dug deeper into the human records. There's more to their history than we first realized. They've faced species far more dangerous than us. Species with technology that could easily obliterate entire fleets, and somehow they survived, over and over again." Terran's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What kind of species could they have possibly faced?" The officer hesitated, clearly unsure how to present the data. "There are reports, scattered through the farthest reaches of space, unverified, but consistent. There's mention of an enemy they refer to as the Exiles, a race of brutal conquerors that destroyed human colonies without mercy. The Perseverance appears to be one of the few ships left after their entire fleet was decimated. But despite being hunted, humans kept fighting back, adapting, rebuilding, and surviving." "How is that possible?" Terran asked incredulously. "No species, especially one as young as humanity, could withstand something like that, not without crumbling completely." "That's what we're trying to understand," the officer replied. "But the records show a pattern. Humans endure. They find a way to survive. Against impossible odds, they find a way to rebuild, to resist." Terran's mind raced. A species that could withstand an enemy like the Exiles, who were apparently more dangerous than even the Empire. It was almost inconceivable. And yet, it was clear now that humanity had a kind of resilience, a fire that burned deep within them. It wasn't just their technology or their weapons. It was their spirit. That was the true danger. The kind of threat that couldn't be measured with sensors or calculated on a battle map. "Keep digging," Terran ordered. "I want to know everything there is to know about the Exiles and how the humans survived them. And I want a psychological profile of this Captain Riley. He's not just a leader. He's the embodiment of everything we've learned about their species. I want to understand him. I want to understand them." The crew worked quickly, the hum of the ship filling the air as data poured in from the Empire's archives. But even as they gathered intelligence, the weight of their approach toward the Perseverance grew heavier. There were no immediate signs of danger from the human ship, no weapons primed or shields raised. And yet, the further they went, the more Terran couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more intricate than a simple military operation. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were playing a game on a level the Empire had never considered. The human captain's earlier words echoed again. "This isn't about victory or defeat. It's about survival." Terran had initially dismissed them as rhetoric, a desperate plea from a dying species. But now he wasn't so sure. Minutes passed. The distance between the two ships dwindled, and with each passing moment, Admiral Terran found himself facing a choice. Would the Empire simply annihilate this human vessel, as it had done with countless others, or was there more to this story, more to this species, than the Empire had ever realized? "Admiral," the communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "We've received another transmission from the Perseverance." Terran's pulse quickened. He'd expected this. The humans had made their declaration, but it was clear they weren't finished yet. "Patch it through," he said, his voice steady, though his mind raced. The screen flickered to life, and once again, Captain Jonas Riley appeared. But this time, his expression was different, more solemn, less defiant. There was a strange, almost resigned air about him, as though he understood something that Terran still didn't. "We've had time to consider our options, Admiral," Captain Riley said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made every word feel significant. "We don't want war, but we won't be erased. Humanity will never kneel, no matter what you do. You don't know what you're dealing with. You think you can destroy us, but it won't be that simple." Terran's chest tightened as the captain's words hung in the air. There was no threat in them, only truth, as though Riley understood exactly how this confrontation would unfold. Terran finally spoke, his voice quiet, yet certain. "We shall see, Captain Riley. We shall see." The transmission from Captain Riley ended, and the bridge fell into a heavy silence. The crew of the dreadnought was still, as if they, too, could feel the weight of the human captain's words. Admiral Terran stood before the command console, his mind spinning with the unsettling realization that the humans were not simply surviving. They were preparing for something. Something beyond a confrontation, something deeper. And yet, they still refused to flee, refused to yield. Terran's instincts, honed through years of command, told him this wasn't a simple battle. The Empire had crushed civilizations with far more advanced technology than humanity possessed, yet these humans, fragile and outgunned, stood before him as if they had already accepted the consequences. But why? "Admiral," the intelligence officer's voice broke through Terran's thoughts. "We've found more information on the exiles. The records are fragmented, but there are consistent reports. This exile species, what we can deduce from the archives, was ruthless, nearly unbeatable. Yet humans pushed them back. Over decades, they fought an endless war. In the end, the exiles were forced to retreat." Terran's eyes narrowed. "So, the humans did defeat them?" he asked, though part of him still found the notion hard to believe. "Not completely," the officer replied, "but they survived. And in surviving, they crippled the exiles' power. After the humans' resistance, the exiles never fully recovered, and their raids stopped. But the most troubling part," he added, almost hesitating, "is that the exiles never truly understood how the humans won. They couldn't comprehend it. It was their will, their relentless refusal to submit, even in the face of annihilation." Terran stood, silent for a long moment. There was something strange in the officer's words. The exiles, a species capable of destroying entire civilizations, had underestimated the humans, and ultimately lost to them. Was it possible? Was there truly a hidden strength in the human spirit that could transcend their technological shortcomings? Is there any record of how the exiles underestimated humanity? Terran asked. What exactly did they miss? The officer turned to his console, pulling up additional data. It seems they believed that by destroying human infrastructure and resources, they could break the will of the species, but they didn't understand something fundamental. Every time they took something from humanity, humanity adapted. They rebuilt, repurposed what they had, and kept fighting. The exiles believed that destroying the military would break the resistance, but it didn't. The humans had an ability to persevere, to adapt, to find ways to keep their culture intact despite everything. The realization hit Terran like a cold wave. The exiles had made a fatal mistake by not understanding the true nature of their enemy. The Empire, for all its power and might, had the same blind spot. The dreadnought could obliterate a fleet of human ships without breaking a sweat, but it could never destroy humanity itself, not without breaking the very thing that made them so dangerous. Terran clenched his fists. The fleet's weapons were primed, ready for a strike that would obliterate the Perseverance in a single blow. But something inside him hesitated. He could feel it. Something about this encounter had changed everything. A single ship, one battered vessel, no bigger than a speck compared to the might of the Empire, was challenging their understanding of power. Admiral, the tactical officer spoke, drawing his attention. "We're approaching the human ship's position. Weapons are ready. It's still holding course, no sign of retreat." Terran's gaze flicked to the view screen, where the Perseverance was now just a few moments away. The ship was small, almost pitifully so compared to the Dreadnought, and yet it stood its ground, silent and unmoving. "Order the fleet to hold fire," Terran commanded, his voice firm, though the decision weighed heavily on him. "We won't fire until we understand more. I need every report on human psychology, military tactics, everything we can glean from their history. We need to know if we're dealing with a mere relic of a species or something much more dangerous." The crew hesitated for a moment, surprised at the unexpected order, but they quickly complied. The tension on the bridge was palpable, and the fleet lingered just out of the human ship's range, the great warships towering over the tiny human vessel. "Send another transmission," Terran ordered. "This time, I want to speak directly with Captain Riley." As the communications officer relayed the command, Terran felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew the human captain would be waiting, as calm as ever, prepared for whatever the Empire would throw at them next. But the Admiral wasn't prepared for what he might learn. Minutes passed. The screen flickered once more, and Captain Riley's face appeared, more weary than before, but still defiant. His eyes met Terran's, unblinking, unwavering. "You wanted to speak to me, Admiral?" Riley asked, his voice almost too calm, as though the battle for survival was already won in his mind. Terran swallowed. He had many questions, but one stood out above all others. "Captain," he began slowly, "what is it that drives you? Why do you fight when it seems there's no hope left?" Riley's eyes darkened. "Because we don't know how to stop fighting. That's who we are. That's humanity." Terran's heart skipped a beat. The simplicity of the answer struck him with a force that sent chills down his spine. The human will to fight wasn't about survival. It was something far more profound. It was about purpose. And for the first time, Admiral Terran wondered if the Empire had misjudged humanity altogether. The transmission flickered and settled, the cold glow of the view screen casting shadows over Captain Riley's face. His words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down without fanfare. "That's who we are. That's humanity." Admiral Terran's pulse quickened. It wasn't just an answer. It was a revelation. The human spirit, the resilience that the exiles had failed to comprehend, was more than just a survival mechanism. It was something deeper, something primal. Humanity didn't just endure. It thrived in adversity. Their strength wasn't in their ships or weapons, but in their will to push forward, no matter the odds. Terran leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Riley's unflinching eyes. "You speak of will," he said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight. "But your species is outmatched. The Empire's power is unrivaled. There's no victory in this for you. No matter how long you fight, you will lose." Riley didn't flinch. "I don't need a victory, Admiral. I just need enough time. Enough time to remind my people that we can still fight. That we can still make a stand, even if we're alone." His voice softened for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was a hint of sorrow in his eyes. "If you destroy us, you'll only make our story that much more meaningful. It's not about who wins or loses in the end. It's about what we leave behind, what you'll have to remember." The word struck Terran hard. It was a perspective he hadn't considered. For all his years in command, for all the battles fought and won, he had never truly understood that sometimes the act of standing firm could be more powerful than the battle itself. The Empire had always taken victory for granted. Power was everything. But Riley's words, his unyielding belief that humanity would leave a legacy even in defeat, unsettled him. It felt profound, as though the true strength of humanity lay not in their ability to destroy, but in their capacity to endure. "What do you expect to accomplish here, Captain?" Terran asked, his voice suddenly weary. "You can't stop us. We'll destroy your ship, and that will be the end." Riley's eyes never wavered. the fire within them undiminished. "You may destroy my ship, Admiral, but you can't destroy what we are. You can't erase what we've become. And if you think this is the last time you'll hear from humanity, you're gravely mistaken. Because when we fight for something bigger than ourselves. We fight for the future we believe in, for the future we will build, even in the face of annihilation." There was a finality to Riley's words, a sense of purpose that resonated deeply in the Admiral's chest. Terran found himself grappling with an unfamiliar emotion, a mixture of respect, fear, and confusion. This wasn't a battle he had anticipated. This wasn't about military superiority. It was about something else entirely. Something the Empire had long since abandoned. The belief in something greater than oneself. The human will to fight for a future, no matter the cost. "Admiral." The tactical officer's voice broke through the tension, her tone sharp and urgent. "The human ship is activating its weapons systems. They're preparing for something." Terran snapped back into command mode, the shock of the conversation fading into the background as his focus sharpened. "What do you mean, preparing for something? Their ship doesn't have the firepower to challenge us." The officer's eyes widened in disbelief as she read the data on her console. "Sir, they've activated an old protocol. It's a form of self-destruct. The Perseverance is rigged to explode. A massive detonation, larger than anything we've seen from a ship of its size." Terran's eyes widened. A weapon of last resort. This was the true desperation, the final stand. The humans were not simply fighting for survival. They were prepared to take everything with them, to burn the galaxy if that's what it took to ensure their legacy endured. "How much time?" Terran barked. The officer's fingers flew over the console. 15 minutes. "Admiral." "Get us within range of the ship's systems," Terran commanded. "We have to disable their self-destruct. We can't let them do this." The crew scrambled into action, the hum of the dreadnought's engines intensifying as they shifted into position. Terran's mind raced. It was clear now. This wasn't just a war for resources or territory. This was a battle for meaning. The human ship's threat wasn't one of power, it was one of sacrifice. A weapon that could only be wielded once, but its impact would be felt forever. He turned back to the screen, where Riley's unflinching gaze met his once more. "You've made your choice, Admiral," Riley said quietly. "But remember this. If you destroy us, it's not victory you will have won. It will be something else entirely. Something you will carry with you long after the battle ends." Terran swallowed, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. He had never felt so uncertain in his entire career. For the first time, he questioned what victory truly meant. As the dreadnought moved closer to the human ship, the Admiral couldn't help but wonder, what would the galaxy look like if humanity won? Not through domination, but through the quiet strength of their will. "Prepare to disable their self-destruct," Terran ordered, his voice steady, but his mind reeling. "We're not going to let them destroy themselves. Not yet." The crew nodded, but as the fleet advanced, the Admiral could feel the gravity of the decision they were about to make. This encounter wasn't over, it was just beginning. The dreadnought maneuvered slowly toward the Perseverance, its enormous bulk dwarfing the smaller human ship. Every moment felt like an eternity as Admiral Terran stood rigidly at the front of the command center, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen, where Captain Riley's determined expression lingered in his mind. There was something in the human captain's eyes, something unspoken, that filled Terran with an unease he had never experienced in all his years of command. The closer they came, the more it seemed like they were approaching something far beyond a simple military confrontation. "Admiral," the communications officer's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're in range of the human ship's systems. We can initiate an override of their self-destruct protocol, but it's going to take some time. The system is encrypted beyond what we anticipated." Terran's mind raced. 15 minutes. That's all they had. The human ship was primed to unleash a catastrophic explosion, one that could devastate the entire sector. If they didn't act fast enough, The Perseverance would destroy not just itself, but everyone in its vicinity. Terran's eyes flickered to the tactical readout. The fleet was positioned to intercept, but the human ship's proximity to the dreadnought made a clean override impossible without risking damage to both vessels. "How long?" Terran asked, his voice low and controlled, despite the pressure mounting within him. "Approximately 10 minutes to bypass the self-destruct protocols," the officer replied, her fingers flying over her console. "The encryption is far stronger than anticipated. This is not just a deterrent. They're prepared for us to attempt this." Terran's fists clenched at his sides. There was no hesitation in the human ship's actions. Captain Riley had prepared for this. He had anticipated the Empire's moves and had set up a final deterrent, not to destroy humanity, but to ensure their legacy would live on in the memory of those who witnessed it. "Prepare to deploy countermeasures," Terran ordered. "We'll disrupt their encryption if it takes every last drop of power we have. Get that ship's systems offline." The crew scrambled to implement the orders. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every second felt more like a countdown to something inevitable. Terran's gaze flickered again to the human ship, its silhouette growing larger and larger on the view screen. The sheer defiance of it, the stubbornness to face the Empire, even when it was clear that all hope seemed lost, left him wondering if there was more to this battle than simply defeating an enemy. "Admiral," the intelligence officer spoke again, drawing his attention. "We found something. An uncharted transmission. It's not part of the self-destruct sequence, but it's coming from their ship. It's encrypted differently from anything we've seen before." "Patch it through," Terran said, his tone sharp. The screen shifted, and instead of the usual scramble of static, a new figure appeared, someone whom Terran didn't recognize. The image was grainy, but the voice was clear, though the speaker was not human. It was an alien, a member of the Exiles. The realization sent a chill through Terran's spine. "We've failed," the Exile said, its voice almost weary, almost resigned. "The humans, they were always stronger than we thought. And now, even if you destroy them, you will never erase what they've done. The Exiles, we couldn't destroy them. And now you won't either. The human spirit cannot be beaten, not by us. Not by anyone." Terran's heart skipped. This was not a typical transmission. The Exiles were defeated, had retreated, but this message, it was a warning. Not just from the humans, but from the very force that had once nearly obliterated them. If the Exiles had underestimated humanity, then surely the Empire was doing the same. "What is this?" Terran demanded, his voice growing tense. "Explain yourself." The Exile on the screen gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if it had known this moment would come. "You are walking into a trap, Admiral. Not a physical one. Not one your sensors will detect, but it will be one that you will not escape. We tried to crush the human will, and we failed. You are doing the same. If you destroy their ship, you will ignite a chain of events that will spread through every corner of the galaxy. The Perseverance is not just a ship. It is a symbol, and the more you press them, the stronger they become." The transmission ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. Terran's breath caught in his throat. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. It wasn't just about the Perseverance anymore. It was about humanity itself, a species that had endured not just through technology, but through something deeper, something untouchable by fleets or weapons. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice brought him back. "We've found a way to disable the self-destruct. We've broken through the encryption. We can stop it." Terran's decision was made. Do it. Now. The crew moved quickly, the hum of the dreadnought's systems shifting as they initiated the override sequence. Seconds ticked by like hours, the anticipation building in the pit of Terran's stomach. He could feel the weight of every choice he had made in the past hours, the consequences of every action they took now. The override finished, and the countdown on the view screen stopped. The Perseverance was safe, at least for the moment. Admiral Terran exhaled slowly, his mind still spinning with everything he had learned. As he watched the human ship on the viewscreen, he finally understood what had been haunting him all along. It wasn't just their technology, their weapons, or their fleet that made humanity dangerous. It was their unwavering spirit. And that was something the Empire would never be able to destroy.